Welcome to the T4TCS podcast and YouTube channel. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and provide your feedback in terms of ideas and topics that you believe are related to T4TCS. We would like to take the time to let our viewers and listeners know that the information discussed here is not to be interpreted as a clinical approach to trauma and psychology. T4TCS was designed to provide insightful information on topics related to post-traumatic growth, finding solutions to somatic healing through a mind and body connection that works for you. It also serves as a platform for members from various communities to learn about positive effects of a trauma-informed approach to self-defense and martial arts training. And now, take the time to enjoy the show.
So welcome back, everybody. This is episode 8 of the T4TCS podcast. Just a reminder, too, we have November 30th. We're doing a trauma-informed women's self-defense awareness program or a seminar. Things are pretty well set up, right? And we've got some merch. I'm wearing one of our polo shirts today. We've got hoodies. We've got training sweaters. We've got a water bottle. We're giving some of that stuff out before. So we have a little contest going on Facebook and social media. So we're going to give some of that stuff out for free beforehand. And we're also giving out a hoodie at the end of the seminar. So have a look out for that. Like our page, support us, do what you want. I mean, we got some awesome stuff going on. So, and the feedback's been pretty good. So today what we wanted to talk about was, actually, we want to have a great discussion with Kurt because we got connected. I got connected anyways to you. Through Mark, because Mark was on one of your podcasts. And then we just started shooting the shit about mental health and the support that you actually have for what we're doing here. And you've given us some good feedback. The other thing that we wanted to talk about too, because it's an important topic, is that we have here in Canada, it's Remembrance Day. Where you are, it's Veterans Day coming up on November 11th. So speaking a little bit about, the importance of supporting the veterans with respect to the mental health and the trauma that not just the veterans go through, but also what the families go through concerning, the deployments and stuff like that, and how that can affect, life in general, right? So, and then you graciously agreed that to be part of the podcast today. So that's amazing. So we're going to try and air this on November 11th to pay tribute to them. And then, but I do want to just talk about mental health in general. You yourself as a veteran, after we get an introduction from you, just lead into, what it's meant, things that you do to cope, things that you've done to sort of bring yourself into the present and focus forward, right? So for the rest of our viewers, please give us the spiel on who Kurt is.
Well, thank you everybody for having me on here, and thank you for the audience for or I should say apologize ahead of time and thank for the audience for putting up with my antics today. I have a wide variety of it. Again, my name is Kurt Patrick.
Our podcast since it's been on.
yeah, I have. So, for starters, my name is Kurt Patrick Leffler II. I'm commonly known as Coach Kurt online, and I'm also known as the Rubber Chicken Man. So, there's some gags attached to that. I'm also the podcast host for 2 FMA Nerds Talk About Stuff. I was also formerly the co-host on the Fight House Talks podcast. Long and short of it is I'm just a big martial arts nerd just doing stuff, but there's a little more depth to that. As for our brothers and sisters that are veterans, I do want to say heartfeltly that thank you for your service. We are an interesting community And we're a community that can be much more than our trauma. So as part of me coming on to this podcast today, I would love to advocate for our community that we're more than just. Because one of the things that's particular to trauma is this issue about generational trauma, as you guys have talked about often and I've talked about, but there's this like conditional love set thing attached to it where we have an identity solely that often is just, this is what we do, therefore this is who we are. And a lot of people don't get past that because, one, they're conditioned to do so, and two, they're not aware that there are options, and three, they just don't have the permission to themselves to say, hey, I'm more than just my trauma, I'm more than just a veteran, I can be so much more, I can be whatever I want to be. So for our veterans out there, just, you can do more than that. So yeah, other than that, I don't know how far back you want to go from that preamble.
I mean, no, thanks very much for sharing that too. And you're right. Like, we're more than just the event, right? We're more than just the identity. And I know myself, and it's nothing in comparison to others, but having been in that situation, it takes a bit, even if you're in it for, 3 or 4 years, because of the training, the camaraderie, the what people term as indoctrination, I guess, so to speak, and not a term that I completely like to use, but essentially it's kind of what happens. But it's also something that you're in service of others because it's part of who you are even before you get in there. But it becomes more ingrained, and then so when you're not in anymore and you're not part of that community specifically, and you're not entrenched in it, it's difficult to get used to regular life again, right? So that part of your identity. And when we talk about the generational thing or even the trauma itself, you can kind of collate that or correlate that to somewhat being traumatizing, because it shatters your new assumptions about how the world works. You got to get used to what the world was like before you got in.
Yep.
Right. So it's a difficult terrain to navigate. I don't know how it was or how it was for yourself, but I know for me it was a bit of a challenge. So
yeah, so talk about, and I bring up the generational trauma and the conditioning aspect because for myself, my adoptive family. So for those who don't know, I'm adopted. I was born in the Philippines and adopted by an American couple who were stationed there in the Philippines. So my adoptive father was there part of the intelligence mission to help remove Ferdinand Marcos from power. And so with that, there's already that kind of like attachment to a community, but more importantly, being an adoptee, I don't necessarily have my own lineage, so to speak. So all my martial arts and my military lineage comes from this adoptive family because I'm an orphan and I don't know much, if anything, about my biological parents. So the history that I have attached to this name is by way of my adoptive family. So with that, my adoptive family is as blue-blooded as Americans can get, because my father, his family came over on the Mayflower, and from there's various immigration through both the Irish and the Germans, but more importantly, military-wise, the Leffler family's been involved in every armed conflict since the French and Indian War. I mean, they were awarded land as a result of their service from there. And so we have had pretty much an unbroken lineage of wartime veterans since then. Like just in the 4 generations, we had my great-grandfather was a infantryman during World War I. My grandfather was a U.S. Marine Raider during World War II. And that's an interesting story about FMA. My dad was an Air Force intelligence officer. And on my mom's side, we had Seabees during World War II. Then on top of all that, we had Green Beret family members during Vietnam. My dad was also involved with Kuwait during the Gulf War, the drug wars, and just a wide variety of stuff. And then on top of all that, myself, I was an Army veteran. My youngest brother was in the Army. My cousins were in the Army and the Marines. So like, talk about the culture. Like, all I was been raised in is you're going to be in the military. This is who we are. because this is what we do. You're a military family, therefore you're going to be a soldier, you're going to be a warrior. And on top of all that, like the martial arts identity is deeply ingrained in that, because all of my family members have a deep steeped martial arts background. So it's just kind of that identity, conditional love thing gets attached to it, of like, you will be a soldier, you will be a warrior, this is who we are. And it's been problematic throughout the years, because attached to all that is all the issues with poverty, alcoholism, substance abuse as a result of PTS and wartime trauma. Because a lot of the patterns of behavior that was taught and handed down it's been a long road, and we're still working through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's forever. It's a forever job, and I should say job, but a forever task, right? And I know you've said that there's lots of stuff that you found that are positive coping mechanisms for yourself. FMA for one, your martial arts that you keep doing, right? And I love the videos. I love them. I know you do. The videos that you're doing, they're pretty cool, right? And that those little shticks that you got going on with them, I think they're cool, right? That's part of your identity now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been part of my identity. It's more or less I have an opportunity just to break out of the conditioning of you have to be this guy. It's like, well, like, I was always this guy. It's just I fell to the lie of I have to be this persona, when the fact is I'm not that guy. So who I am is the stuff that I do anyways. I'm highly sarcastic. I try to be entertaining, because the fact is I find myself wanting more of that rather than the super serious. I'm in my tactical setup and I have to do the murder kill stuff. Like that stuff, like that was a phase of my life, but that's not a phase that is sustainable. So I'd much rather have fun with what I do, and hopefully that inspires other people to have fun rather than get stuck in that kill stabby go get some mentality. So
yeah, and that's something that you mentioned that, and that's something I guess I blocked out. I found that difficult even before, like, I know it was training, but even getting into that zone, even, when those things were being said, and then the whole platoon is doing that and you're going along, you're doing the training. It was different to get used to that, right? Because that wasn't part of my lineage. Actually, I shouldn't say that. It was, but it wasn't something that was prominent through the household.
Yeah.
Right. My grandfather, we lived with them when we were young and we were growing up, and he was, part of the Royal 22nd Regiment. So the Van Hughes, and they're very well known. And then later was a police officer in New Brunswick, and, but he didn't talk about that much. It wasn't a prominent discussion. And it wasn't until there was an event that had occurred at home where he kind of gave me the look like, I know what you're going through.
Yeah.
Right. So and then during the healing process, or I guess during the recovery or the post-traumatic growth process and stuff like that, you sort of, I forget some of the stuff. Right. And then when you brought that up, like, you're going through that go get some mentality, and it's difficult to think that I was there at one point. And it's still part of my identity. I'm never going to take that away from myself. But people talk to me now, it's like, well, you're so gentle. Like, it's hard to believe that you were that person. Right. Yeah. I guess one of the students has actually at the dojo mentioned that to us one night when she was leaving. It's like, I just can't imagine you being that kind of person. You're just that, even training. She says that I'm a gentle person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but it's stuff that I worked really hard to kind of put at bay, I guess.
I mean, anger and violence is not sustainable, because, I mean, you have to tap into it when you need to, but just like everything else, like holding on to anger, holding on to guilt, holding on to that rage. I mean, it's caustic. It tears you up inside, and it's not sustainable for long-term health, for one, and good, healthy relationships. And on top of all that, it's like, what are you putting forth for patterns of behavior for those around you, especially your children? Because when I look at this stuff now, I had a really fucked up childhood, particular to martial arts and military, amongst other things, but particular to the martial arts and military. I mean, I grew up with the stories of my grandfather doing stuff as a Marine Raider. Like, and of course, there's always this issue about, it's like, if he tells you the stories, he's probably a liar. It's like, no, we have documentation talking about his combat actions. I mean, there's documentation of, like, he was taking prisoners with just a knife. He was taking trophies with just a knife. We have family memorabilia and trophies that he had taken off of people that he had killed in World War II and brought it back to the family and those stories. And then on top of all that, when he was passing of Alzheimer's, like, all of it came out. Like, I had watched this one time when somebody had mouthed off to my grandmother, and he beat the fuck out of him with a newspaper. And then he's teaching us as throughout the summer, like, this is how you stab and kill somebody. And I was like 8 years old. So that's information that's not necessarily needed at that age. Then on top of all that, like, my dad was doing the same stuff because that's the same patterns that he had. And on top of all that, like, we have extended uncles and cousins that were Green Berets, and one of them committed suicide, and the other one, he didn't talk a lot about it, but there was always just stories and anecdotes that we were raised with. And so, in speaking with, like, my siblings, like, we've all compared notes as to, like, there was just stuff that we were taught and told that's just not normal. And on top of all that, like, some of the stuff that my dad got involved in, especially with operations in Latin America to go after going after the Medellin cartel, like, we had specific training as a family to, like, deal with personal protection and E&E. Like, we had and kidnapping, because we had a pro team attached to us for many, many years. Because, like, my dad would go off on these trips, and, like, okay, there's the guys out in front of the house watching us, and we're just talking about this stuff and preparing for this stuff. So it's like, it's not normal. And as a result of it, it's kind of coded a thing for me and my siblings of, like, this is who we are. And it's weird in a lot of ways. It's necessary, but it's kind of weird because it's not the normal thing. So when I repackage and reframe this stuff, it's like, I can still teach this stuff. Let's teach it appropriately at an age that my children can process through this stuff without putting, like, the egregious, like, we're going to stab this because we're going to do that. It's like, I'm 8 years old at the dinner table. I don't need to know the shit. Not yet, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, and I think like, we can open up the floor too. My grandfather, when he was passing, getting up there, like, if one thing that I could plug in, like, as him being a veteran and then being a police officer and then going into the public or the private sector later, up until his late 80s, he was still shoveling his own driveway in New Brunswick in the Maritimes. That's no easy feat, right?
Yeah.
But when things started to go downhill, I remember my mom, she's out there, and she was out there for about a year and a half, and he started to kind of lose it mentally, right? And I say that with grace, because some of the stuff that he was starting to do was mirroring the things that he had gone through. You can tell because he was constantly checking the front window, closing and opening the blinds, looking at vehicles, and identifying vehicles and saying things to my mom. And my mom was like, "But no, nobody's here watching you." Right. So from a mental health perspective, like, we suppress that stuff, but it comes back. Right. Mm-hmm. And the more we suppress it, the more damage it does, the more damage it does to the body. And eventually, when it starts to deteriorate, it's all going to come to the forefront.
Yeah.
In some way, shape, or form, whether it comes out from the mind and the mouth later on in life, or it's in the form of a stressor in the body, right? And like you said, it's pretty caustic and damaging. So
yeah, there was this one incident when my grandfather was going through Alzheimer's that he had barricaded himself in a room, and, like, he was locked and loaded and ready to go. And it took my father and my uncle, when he was still alive, to, like, trying to ease him out of that. You're no longer in a bunker. You need to come out. And at 8 years old, that was just terrifying, but it was normal for us. And it's I don't know.
Yeah. You guys have any questions? Because I know it's a pretty heavy subject.
Well, yeah, no, I do have a question, because especially when you mention a generational trauma, it seems like you've been collecting that trauma from your grandfather and your father, and now it was passed on to you before you even became a soldier, before you even became a Marine. So
I was Army.
question is, yeah, my question is, what do you do to make sure that that trauma does not get passed down from you to your children? Because obviously you're very aware of it. I mean, I know you say, oh, at 8 years old, this was normal stuff to you, but it's not normal.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it might be normal to you, but when you think at normal circumstances, this is extremely abnormal, right? So what do you do yourself to kind of make sure that your kids don't get the trauma that has been collected from generation to generation to generation?
A big part of that, for one, therapy is a big part. I will say this: we go to the doctor when we're sick, we go to a mechanic when our vehicle's broken or we don't want to work on it, we go to the gym, go to therapy to unpack this stuff. That's a huge part. Or find a peer support mentor to work your way through this stuff, to find a productive way to get past all of that, to reassure you that like what is normal and this is a little abnormal. So that's a big part. The other part is I have a spouse that's incredibly supportive, and a spouse that is like her family is a great example of stability, because which is interesting with her family is everybody who marries into the family comes from a very unstable background, and her family has always been really strong and has a strong sense of identity. There's not a lot of military, not since World War II, but as a result of that, they've had a strong sense of self. And so my spouse makes it a point, my wife makes it a point to say, hey, identify that that's not normal. Let's work our way through. And so there's that balance of chaos and companionship and creativity and normality that my wife and I work as a dynamic. And the third one, which is really the one that comes back to the most, is I remember being that little boy asking where my dad was at. I remember him coming home from trips and there was something new and there was something different. So it's always that, like, I don't ever want to be that child. And like, in the process of therapy is healing that inner child of saying, hey, I don't want to be that kid. I don't want to be that kid asking anymore for where my dad is, and that fear of him not coming home, because like a lot of the stuff he was involved in, I mean, he was involved in special operations during doing covert operations, so like there's always those questions of like, are we safe? Is he safe? And so with all that, for my own kids, I made a promise to myself that if once upon my kids start asking when dad is coming home, that was the time to hang it up and just be out of the military. So I got out in 2016, and my daughter was three or four at the time. So it's just, that was a big part. And now moving forward is I don't have stuff from when I was in the Army up in the house. I have it put away in a footlocker or just somewhere else. And I don't put the paraphernalia up anywhere in the house, because it's not that I'm ashamed about it. There's parts about it that I am. There's parts about it that I'm very bitter and angry about, but it's just trying to move beyond that. I am trying to establish a cultural identity within our own family of that the military is part of our culture. Yes, it's part of our lineage and legacy, but I don't need to have it constantly like reminded on that giant wall of, hey, look at me wall of look at all my accomplishments as the military. And look at all the accomplishments and trophies of the family, which, I mean, it's important for family history. It's just I choose not to have that stuff up because it's such a reminder of a whole bunch of childhood trauma and family trauma in general. So I make it a point not to have up there. And it's not that my kids don't know that I was in the military. I mean, they ask and we talk about some stuff, and it's all like flashes and blips. But I just trying to make it a point not to have stuff of me, photos of me in uniform, or just general like stuff on the wall about it. So that's a big part.
Great, I got a question, and
Yeah, bro.
I want you to be comfortable answering it, but for people who have experienced this.
Mm-hmm.
What's the contrast of you as a child having to watch your father come home knowing he's dealing with some stuff versus how it felt for you to come home having to have to deal with stuff? And did the way you deal with it, was it influenced by what you saw from your father on your upbringing?
Yeah. Part of that is I had what I call is a very boring and lackluster military career, and I did that on purpose because watching a lot of the men in my family be destroyed by war, because we had a lot of special operators, had a lot of infantrymen. We just had a lot of people that are highly involved in kinetic operations, and just like they're straight up warriors. But at the cost of all that, there's a lot of damage. Like there's a lot of drug use, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of just abuse. And I did not want to parrot that, and I did not want to repeat that cycle. So I chose a military occupation that could be attached to combat arms and special operations, but I chose specifically when I first enlisted not to go that route, because I saw that as a kid and as a young man, and I didn't want to go that route. However, I mean, I enlisted post 9/11 and I was rearing to get in the fight. So like I got caught up in the lie of patriotism at that point as a young man. So I was called to service, but I also had contingencies to make sure that I was not totally thrown into the shit, so to speak, but it could. And also, just for some clarity, I actually never made it to Iraq or Afghanistan. I was very fortunate, even though I tried really hard. I really tried hard to get over. It's just the units that I got attached to had other operational necessities. So I never made it to combat operations there. However, I was involved in stuff involving like the border and a lot of domestic operations and just stuff like that. But that's due in part because the MOS that I had that freedom and opportunity to not be attached directly into those things. Because if I was just a base infantryman, I mean, I would have been gone and ready to go. But being attached to infantry, I had a little more opportunity to move around. But point being is, like, when I came back from stuff, there was only really 2 incidences where my daughter actually was there when I was coming back. Because I mean, the majority of my time in the military, my kids were really, really young. Like my son has no memory of me being in the army because I was out by the time he was born. And I was getting out as he was born, and my daughter was so small. So really, it's my wife that knows all this, and it's just, again, that mental image of me chasing after my dad. I mean, they're working through therapy, is that little boy trying to grab for the hand of his dad and asking. That has been so powerful for me, and I did not want to repeat that with my own kids. So I made it a point not to get involved, not as a point of cowardice, but as a point of, I don't want to repeat this cycle, especially being married and having kids. Now, conversely, if I wasn't married and didn't have kids, that's a different story. I would have gone and done the things. It's just I got married before I went to active duty, so my priority was shifted. But prior to that, I was ready to go to do stuff. It's just I didn't have the opportunity. So it's very different. Say like my youngest brother, who went originally on an 18 X-ray special operations MOS and pipeline, where he was going through Ranger School. He went and he was going to airborne and doing all the lead up for combat operations, and got attached to a infantry battalion. But he's single and he got to go do that stuff. So that's really the main dynamic that I look at, is because I was married and I didn't want to be that little boy, and I didn't want my children to repeat that, I made certain decisions for my career not to do certain things. Not to say that I didn't have an unfulfilled career, because I did some great stuff and I really loved my guys and the things that I did when I was in the Guard. But active duty wise, I just had a different path. So hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does. And it's like, to be that aware of it is huge, right? And I think of that too in terms of, my family, and some of the stuff, even when I was, in the private sector, as I was a new dad, I was gone, and there's stuff that you see, and it affected me when I came home, and I knew it did, and I knew it affected my family. So eventually, because of being gone, being away from home, being away from the family, not being there, watching things, not watching, the family grow, that hurt. And then also it hurt the fact that I came back, like sometimes I would come back home, hurt, and then guarded, and then not being open.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then being a bit of a, secluding myself a bit, because I didn't want to hurt them. But then in fact, it's actually hurting them even more.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult thing to do, and to be aware of it and start actually doing that, going through the process of breaking that chain is a difficult thing to do as well. But once you do it, then you feel that weight off the shoulders, right?
Yeah, and a weight that I've been actually working through the most is this issue about survivor's guilt. Of like, I was in the army for 11 years during the height of the GWAT, and I never saw combat. I mean, a majority of my work was domestic and in operations in Southeast Asia. So, like, I did not fulfill, so to speak, my duty as a soldier, so to speak, during a time of war. Which, I mean, the fact is, through reframing, I did fulfill my duty. It's just I had this thing of like, I was a really good NCO and I was very good in my field, and I looked at it as like it was a waste of effort or just a misuse of skills capability that I wasn't able to professionally fulfill my obligations and duties as a non-commissioned officer, like leading my soldiers, fulfilling their needs as a communications NCO whilst they were needed. I did a lot of that in training, but like, training only gets you so far, and I've had this really deep pain to work through of like, hey, I enlisted to get in the fight. I enlisted to serve my country, and I felt like my enlistment wasn't fulfilled because I didn't see combat, and that hurts a lot. But I'm working my way through it, because the fact that what's interesting is my youngest brother, which I'm 15 years older than him, he saw combat operations at the tail end of stuff, and it's like I missed. It's like it feels like I missed the entire war. That's something that I have processed through, but I've had to reframe a lot of that because the stuff that I did do was of value. It just took me a long time to figure that out. So like, there's that balance, that dynamic of like doing the job but feeling like you didn't do the job. And so in the process of trying to work my way through of dealing with my military career, a lot of it is there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of just being upset and anger because I didn't get to do the stuff that everybody else did it. Now I look at this other, and my wife has really pointed this out of, at what cost would have that been for you to go do this stuff? Because like, the units that I could have been attached to, because like I had an option before, especially during 2007. I mean, that's the height of the Iraq war. I mean, that's during the surge. Like when I was there, I mean, they were sending thousands of dudes through the first Cav, fourth ID, third ACR. I mean, there was thousands of dudes going, and I had that opportunity, but for some reason, the universe said, not going to happen. You're going to go to a air missile defense battalion. I was one of like 2 guys out of like couple of thousand people that was in that initial phase right there of in processing that went to this Patriot battalion. And yeah, that hurt. It's like I enlisted specifically for active duty to go, and I didn't, so that hurt. And then when I was in the Guard, same things. We just kept missing stuff because missions were just in between. So it's stuff like that hurts.
Yeah, and I remember, like, for myself, like, I was in the middle of training, and I got a call, and it was pretty tough. Found out that somebody in the family tried to take their life, and doing what I was doing, it just didn't match anymore.
Yeah.
Right. I was like, I felt guilty for doing what I was doing because somebody just tried to do it to themselves.
Yeah.
And then the other part of me felt guilty for not fulfilling that part of my life either in the service process. And so it was really, for me, it was a struggle. It was a huge struggle because I was on my way to do some, like you, it was almost set in stone, because after graduation, it was like, this is where we're going to see you. Right. And that was the path that was laid out. And so to get that call was horrible.
Yeah. And
it really forced me to take stock in what I needed to do. And then I just couldn't concentrate on the level of the optimum level that you need to perform at.
Yeah.
And I didn't think it was noticeable until, the sergeant and the warrant officer pulls you aside and says, there's something going on. You're not yourself. Right. And then they talk to you and you're trying to hide it. And then they know there's something that's going on. So, things go on for about a week or so. And then they're like, no, we did some digging. We found some stuff out. You need to chat.
Yeah.
Thankfully, though, I was with some awesome and supportive people in our platoon, and the chain of command supported the move for me to come back and be close to home and transfer.
And that's huge. That's
yeah.
Because this is another part that people don't understand about the military is, one, there is the joke amongst veterans about being the disgruntled veteran that, like, it's a toxic relationship. It's an abusive relationship. We hate it when we're there, but we miss it afterwards because we miss our buddies and the memories, but it's still that dynamic back and forth. But the point being is, like, it's a toxic environment. It's a destructive environment. You have so many bad behaviors and programs and just people that are in the military, because a lot of them go in with a lot of issues. I know I did. And then they get this culture developed of just toxicity and anger and just bad leadership styles, which is, again, it's not normal, but it is the norm for that. So with all that, like, I had a really shitty time on active duty. I had a very toxic, unsupportive, antagonistic chain of command. And I really hated the Army. I mean, it was just like I came home angry because, like, when I was in the reserves initially, I loved it. I was doing all the cool guy stuff. I was the golden private coming up. Then I had this idea, like, let's go to war. So I enlisted for active duty, didn't go to war, got attached to this battalion, this air missile defense battalion, and just was angry at the aspect that I didn't get to go. This battalion's chain of command was awful. I was being targeted for a lot of stuff. So, like, I was coming home angry all the time. My wife and I were going through a lot of problems because we were newly married, and I was coming home angry all the time with this unit. Then when I got out of the active duty and transferred into the Guard, things changed. I fell in love again with the mission in the military, especially after I got my sergeant, and like, I was doing the stuff and I was being appreciated and I was fulfilling my obligations. It's just the other caveat to that is we had a very strong toxic drinking culture. So, like, going to drill was like, we did the job, we also got drunk as fuck and created other toxic environments. So it's just, I know it's about the culture of the unit that really matters. And it's also about your frame of mind going in and having that strong resiliency of sense of identity and self, and also those boundaries and barriers. But as you know, like, people are going to try to get you to drink. People are going to try to get you to do the camaraderie thing. People are just going to do, like, we're doing mandatory NCODP. That means we're getting drunk and hanging out and talking about our soldiers. Like, it's unavoidable. The drinking culture, the toxic drinking culture, is just unavoidable. Plus, you have all the other trauma-related stuff on top of all that. It's just, it's a hard community to live in. And so, and it's a toxic relationship that, like I said before, that we hate it when we're in, but we miss it thereafter. And it's a weird thing.
It is. And like, when I made that move, and then finally, things were, I continued progressing and stuff like that. Kind of like you, I had put in to go out. But you said the universe had different plans. But when it was all said and done, I felt ashamed because I didn't fulfill what I really originally went there for.
Yeah.
That personal shame is something that I carried for a long time, and I had to get over that. And I still feel that guilt every once in a while, but then I remember, I didn't have any control over some of those things.
Yeah, and that's a huge one. Knowing that you don't have control of your destiny or your career in the military. As much as we have our wish list, it's needs of the Army, it's needs of the military. So unless you're in specific pipelines, but even then, it's still needs of the military. And the thing that it really helped me get past a lot of this is I had a fellow NCO that I really respected. He was also special operations. And he put it to the point of, you did the stuff that you needed to do. You still served. But on top of all that, like, dealing with trauma ahead of time, like, you did not need combat trauma to be validated. Because in my own backstory, my own history, like, I should have never been allowed to enlist in the military, period, because of all the trauma and the violence and the stuff that I was dealing with prior to enlistment. It's just needs of the military in 2007. They lowered the enlistment bar and they were just sending bodies. And I skated through, so to speak, and with a waiver, and, like, I should have never been in the military, period. but
Right.
I was. And so with that, I had all the crap that I dealt with ahead of time, like all the violence. I've been shot at more times than I prior to being in the military than I was ever in the military. I'll just put it that way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's there's something to say there.
So,
Yeah.
would you say that the support system and then integration to society system is just broken in military?
I mean, it depends. It really, for one, it requires the advocacy and the education of the soldier. Because here's the other one too. As a soldier coming out, especially as a young one, there's this like if you enlisted 18 and you got out in say your 20s, that's like all of your formative adult years. So you really know no better. And then on top of all that, if you enlisted at 18 and got out at 40, it's still the same thing. That's the culture that you know. So, and I find people who've been in there longer have a harder time because they have so much time invested in that transitioning is harder. Now, the caveat to that is say, like, if you go from active duty to the guard, you have more of an opportunity to transition back and forth between working from the military life and integrating into civilian life. The problem being with that, like, half-time soldier, is you're balancing those two identities. And on top of all that, you can't really be successful at either without committing completely to one or the other. So that part is hard. Now, within the guard, you have a lot more opportunity for these more experienced, well-developed, well-rounded individuals that can bring in their skill sets from their civilian life into the unit. So they end up having a little bit more successful structures of organization and implementation versus like you have a single data set of this is all we know and this is all we do. And that's just the same of that when somebody comes out of the military. If that's all they know, then they know no other coming out. So again, the individual service member needs to have the advocacy and the education and do the research ahead of time, getting out, set themselves up as before they leave, instead of just like cold turkey, here's your DD 214, fuck off. Like that's not a modality of success, even though that's been a common thing. But again, when you're in a system that is provided for you and you're used to the regimen and the discipline and the structure of like your day is planned out for you, your life is planned out for you, then you really don't have advocacy necessarily. You just have a lot of structure. And when you come out of that, that is actually where it's problematic, is you lose that structure. And most importantly, you lose that tribe, you lose that brotherhood, you lose that community and identity piece. And this is where a lot of guys and gals just suffer on the back end because they don't know how to integrate into this new community, how to make new friends. And there's also like that cultural conflict. I mean, just language alone. Like we have a specific language and mannerisms that a lot of people just don't get along with. So, and that part's hard. But on top of all that, this is where peer support mentorship is really huge, where you have guys and gals who've been out long enough that they can bring in a person and bring them underneath their wing and say, hey, this is how we do things. It's okay. And that's the beautiful part about that generational structure of you have guys and gals who came before and now are succeeding after the fact and can help themselves through it. But one, you have to find them, and you have the presence of mind to accept their help and work through. So it's a lot of little pieces, and not everybody gets all of them lined up, let alone all of them ready and able to actuate them. So
would that be a reason why you think a lot of these guys who come out of the military do well with their healing with the martial arts?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, it's a tribal structure. It's a big part. It's a structure. You have a command structure. You have a senior person leading the pack. You have a group of like senior students who are like your NCOs, help guide people through it. You have dedicated times, curriculum, goals that you're setting in place, and like it's all structure. And on top of all that, it's shared suffering. Everybody's there to do a thing. They love the thing that they're doing, and it's hard. Yeah. And therefore, it builds a community that should be uplifting. Obviously, we know about toxic martial arts communities as well, but it's really like you have that group and that tribe. What's different about the martial arts community, say the military, is it's not necessarily a profession unless it is. Because as a participant, this isn't the thing that you do to make a living. So you have that freedom of I don't have to put all my eggs in one basket.
Did you notice a significant difference in yourself? Were you training martial arts prior to you being part of the military, or was it something you did later on? Like, and how did you use it to regulate your healing and your stress and your trauma?
So, along with a long military history with my family, we have a long martial arts background. Like my grandfather was a Golden Gloves boxer. Obviously, he picked up some sort of FMA when he was going through campaign. My dad was one of those crazy ass American like open karate kempo guys back in the 70s and 80s. So he was a world champion in that. So one of my uncles was a Lima Llama, like fifth degree black belt. Like there's a lot of martial arts in the family. So, and this is all through the adoptive family. So I started training martial arts when I was 4 in the backyard with my dad, my grandfather, my uncles. So it was always there. And on top of all that, like I went through like the whole dojo gi phase. I went through the national and international championship tournament phase. Like it's always been there. So with all that, like that identity of you'll always be a soldier, you'll always be a fighter or martial artist, I really know no other thing than that. And so both of them worked together, and both of my identity was contingent upon how good and what I do with both. So it was always there. So when I had them both taken away from me at certain points, it was devastating because I didn't know anything else. So what's different now in the reframe is that I don't need to do martial arts for a job. I don't need to do it for a living. I don't have necessarily my professional and personal identity attached to it. I get to do this stuff for fun. And that was a huge burden lifted off of me when I shut my gym down. But I've always had martial arts. I've always had combat sports in my life. And I've gone through a lot of stuff with it. So
would you say that you mentioned counseling before?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of relief, if you can just, maybe for somebody who has some trauma and they're looking to get help and then kind of thinking about what kind of help they want, what would you say the difference is between having someone to speak to and the benefits of that versus the physical exertion in martial arts and the healing that you feel from that? What's the contrast between those two methods of healing?
So when you're doing with a clinician who is going to sit there and work your way through the mental aspect, work you through like EMDR and work your way through trauma regression and all those very technical things in that education, they are the SME, subject matter expert in that field, and that is their job, and that's the lane that they stay in. For martial artists, their job is to do their specific task, is teach martial arts. However, there's this thing like you get to know people, you get to know their stories, you're empathetic, you're compassionate, and as coaches and teachers, you pick up on things, and you pick up on some ideas and ways to deal with mentorship and working way through people. Again, it's that whole structure of been there, done that, let me help you mentor through that. But the very tricky problem is that their job is not to be a therapist. Their job is to teach their specific job of being a martial artist. But because we love our students and compassion and whatever, and we're invested in them, we can sometimes muddy the lines into stuff that we're not qualified, let alone have the authority to do so. And that's where it gets really messy in dealing with, say, like compassion fatigue and vicarious traumatization. Because that was a big problem that I ran into with my gym, as I did not have the boundaries set in place within myself. And I got too attached and too involved with stuff. And there was only so much resourcing that I have for myself, let alone like not knowing how to process through my own stuff. And so it's like two blind people trying to walk through a maze is essentially what I was dealing with. So it took me to the point of shutting the gym down and stop teaching and going through the work to work myself through all of this to actually now understand my boundaries, my advocacy, and also just that establishment of this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm not going to do, if that makes any sense.
I think it makes a ton of sense, and it actually brings me to what we do here, like what we're trying to do with T4 TCS, right? Like bringing in the training to be trauma informed, understanding, how vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue manifests itself,
mm-hmm.
but also bringing that professionalism from as a martial arts coach, sensei, teacher, but like you said, being aware of what's happening and understanding when and when not to engage, recognizing a trigger and saying, hey, this is not for me. This is for the subject matter expert.
Yeah. Now, the other side of this with like a trainer is that their job is the physical standpoint. But there's also that fight mentality of you can work your way through this. You can fight your way through this, but it's not the only answer. Like there's time and a place for that. And that's the job of what a martial arts instructor can deal with some of the psychology and mental health of an athlete and student, but it's not their job to diagnose, but they understand through experience. Like you can subcompartmentalize because at some point, because you need to, like you can't go through all their trauma recognition and processing when they're getting punched in the face. Like you can't regress them through while they're in the cage and fighting, but you can teach them ahead of time to build up their resiliency and the confidence through capability of saying, hey, there's times when you need to shelve this because you have to be present. And that's very procedural and practical, but it's not saying anything like we're doing this because your emotional background, your psychological traumatic background. So it's that distinction is really important, I think.
Absolutely. And then what I guess where I was going with that too is that also like during a training scenario, let's say for example, we do we're teaching the client happens to be a victim of domestic violence or rape or something like that, and all of a sudden, boom, they get triggered and you put a triangle choke or you put a rear naked choke on them. Well, we could recognize that and help say, look, let's step back. If this is a trigger for you, or by your choice and your choice alone, we can help you recognize how to actually push past this and know that this is not the same situation you were in, and then be comfortable with the training again, right? So there's certain, and that's just one scenario I'm putting out there, but also recognizing that there's a somatic release to that stressor, right? So there's a way to shake it out essentially, and right there's that energy is stored energy, and then we got to get it out. So sometimes that trigger is not a bad thing, but recognizing that it is a trigger and communicating that with the student and understanding that is probably, like in our view anyways, is an incredibly important thing. But like you said, not being a person that's going to, let's dive into this and then talk about it and do the therapy right on the spot. Well, no, that's not the place for it.
Yeah.
But hey, we recognize that this is a trigger point for you. If it is, please let us know. We'll step back if you want to, and you let us know if you want to continue moving forward.
Yeah, and it's also incremental, because just like anything else that has a set of progression, we developed confidence through capability. We developed resiliency and having faced adversity. And so we have to face difficult and hard things, and also take on certain physical trauma, so to speak, to determine like what's distinct. Like you have to get hit to understand what it's like to get hit. And you also have to get hit to understand consistently enough to and face physical struggle to understand, like, let's build the baseline of understanding, like, this is pain I can work through, this is fear of pain, this is actual injury, this is discomfort. And like, but that resiliency piece is built up at the behest of a lot of pain, and not a lot of people understand. I mean, people understand that they've been doing it enough, but it's that whole, you build confidence and resiliency at the behest of a lot of injury and pain. And putting that into context is really important. And that's where an instructor or senior student or mentor can actually help that person work their way through it, so they can understand that. But their job is not to diagnose and run them through therapy.
So. Yeah, same. Okay. Yeah, no, I just wanted to touch on that, because that's a lot of those principles, what we're trying to do with respect to T4 TCS, right? So it was an interesting segue that you started talking about that, in your some of the stuff that you were navigating when you decided that you were going to close up shop, right? Because you recognized, you had that self-awareness that you were going through some vicarious trauma and that compassion fatigue, right? So
like a lot of that vicarious trauma came about, and For one, I was highly involved in the addiction recovery community. We actually had a nonprofit organization that ran a program through our gym that I was involved with called Fit to Recover. So we did peer support advocacy and programs of like, we're going to do a physical activity and then we're going to talk about it afterwards, which in theory was great, but none of us were qualified clinicians. It was all peer support. So we could sit, and again, that was a good idea, but not qualified. On top of all that, like the majority of my clients, especially my youth clients, came by way of CPS as referrals as part of their therapy plan. And it's just the same with the mental health community. So like I got privy to case files and documents of like, this is what this child's going through. Here's the things to be concerned about, and work your way through it. And the problem again is like, I'm not qualified to deal with this, and this isn't my authority, and there was a lot of stuff I knew about it. I call it the weight of knowledge and all that, and that weighed me down so heavily. Like I love these kids because I got highly involved and empathetic in them, and like I had this empathy of the fact that like I recognize myself and my own upbringing and a lot of these kids. So I was triggered in there, and trying to help them from that state didn't work. And so I had this consistent thing of like a lot of the anger held for these parents or guardians who mistreated these children, abused these children, neglected these children, but I had no authority to do anything about it. And that was devastating above all.
Did you have any knowledge at the time of like the trauma informed awareness or anything like that at the time either?
I did to a point, because I mean, I worked in the mental health community for a bit, and also growing up the way that I grew up, because one, being adopted, and my adoptive parents had hundreds of kids come through our home as foster kids. So we had a lot of mandatory training throughout the years, even though like this is the 90s and 2000s, and we can't necessarily say mental health was very well developed during that time period. Yeah. So with that, there was a lot of just things that were just wrong. But we would go through these phases of education saying, this is what to recognize, this is the things to be aware of. So we went through a lot of counseling as a family growing up to deal with this stuff. But we were around I grew up around a lot of extremely mentally ill children, and that it affected our family to a point of catastrophe, and to my own catastrophe later on. Because like vicarious trauma has been always attached to us. So like, I was coming from the trauma informed of having the lived in experience, but not actually the professional experience of distancing myself and actually being qualified to deal with it. It was very much learned from experience, but not through proper education, and being disconnected from it. Because like two of my adoptive sisters were incredibly mentally ill, and they were both sexually abused as children, as toddlers before they came to us. They both had reactive attachment disorder. One's got extreme schizophrenia. The other one is in jail for a wide variety of assaults. And like even she attacked me at one point, which led to a whole long story. But again, this stuff has always been part of my life, having lived it, but I didn't have the point of education and authority to deal with it as a professional martial arts instructor. So I empathized, but I didn't really know what to do.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thanks for sharing that too. So, I mean, a lot of this, from what I understand, is like, it's in the core language for yourself, as well as being part of your epigenetic code.
Yeah.
And not specifically genetics, but that just shows how powerful epigenetics can be, right? The exposure, the elements, and all of that other stuff. And then the core language that you speak and that you experienced is all part of that, right? So, and again, it's stored, all that generation. And then they come from, because they're all adopted, every single person brings their own core language.
Yep.
Into that. And then there's just I can just imagine how that would have been to navigate, and how it's still something that's transferring throughout, the family, right? So,
well, a lot of it, I mean, this is where a lot of my compassion and empathy came from, because I did a lot of work with at-risk youth. I was a huge advocate for at-risk youth and homeless youth, because I was one. And like going through this whole list of like a lot of the kids that came through our home, like myself, I was born in a brothel. I'm a product of prostitution. Okay, so there's that's established. My my middle brother, he was a child who came from a crack house. He was addicted to crack as an infant, and he's worked his way through that. My two other siblings, the two girls, sexually assaulted, abused, abandoned, and everything attached to that. We had child soldiers who come through. We had a lot of kids who were refugees. I had one of my favorite people that came through, but he was involved in a homicide at 16. So like there was a whole long list of just stuff. And on top of all that, like the things that we had to worry about for family protection is a lot of these kids came in underneath obviously a lot of strenuous circumstances where we had people show up trying to take these kids from their own family. So there was a lot of violence attached to like taking the kids out of their home by their biological family. So there was a lot of incidences that we had to deal with, that like people trying to get in fights and pull guns and shit, trying to take their kids, and the cops get involved and CPS gets involved. So it was nothing but chaos growing up. My parents had this noble idea of they just wanted to have kids and love and everything else. It's just they themselves didn't know how to do it anyways. Because like my adopted mother is adopted. My adopted father, he came from poverty and all the war trauma attached to that family. So like they just didn't know what they knew. And again, every generation gets better, but it is, I mean, just like anybody else who has kids, we just kind of make this shit up as we go along based upon what we have learned and experienced beforehand. But with my adoptive parents, despite their nobility in this, and I'm grateful for them for it, but as a result of it, like they just didn't know what they were doing, and it has lasting effects. So it's the interesting like irony of being an adoptee is, one, it is a trauma that we have to be grateful for, and it's a trauma that we just accept because without it we don't exist. So this creates like this debt gratitude thing that we're constantly trying to navigate.
Yeah, and splitting the identity, right? Like again, it's an identity thing, right? So you're trying to find that and figure out who you are specifically, but you can't ignore what you can't ignore and what happened before you. So that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that, by the way.
Yeah. I don't often get to share that story. So
honestly, Kurt, considering your past, you seem like such an awesome guy. Seriously, because I mean,
yeah, he's okay.
Yeah,
I try to be.
you're literally your entire life was uphill, and then you're so happy and like such high energy, good spirited that you could have gone completely the other way,
And I was for a long time, and thank you for that. It's taken me a long road. I mean, I've had 4 suicide attempts. I was homeless. I got involved in gangs. I involved with drugs, and I was an alcoholic since I was 16. I mean, I've been sober since 2016, but again, it's just all this is tied into that. Like all my violence, like and stuff happened prior to the military. It's like, and it's all there. And the thing that I was looking at, especially when I was shutting the gym down and that last suicide attempt, is I made this decision of like, I'm tired of trying to kill myself. I am tired of just dying inside and feeling like that. So I made a choice of, well, that didn't work, so let's do something else. And more importantly, I want to have the family that I've always wanted, the stability and the structure and that safety, and that on top of all that blood connection, my children. Because as an adoptee, you never know who you belong to because you don't know. And so my children were that point of grounding my wife and just recognizing that is actually what is there and accepting that, and also getting past what was and just making that decision. So that last time where I had died, I made a choice, and especially over COVID, that if I want to be here, I'm going to be here. So I'm going to do the things necessary to be here. And that's at the behest of a lot of therapy, which, because therapy fucking works.
Yep.
And just working through it. And a lot of it is take accountability. And if I want to do a thing, stay with it. I know for a lot of people it's hard. And for my case, it's a very unique case that I had enough things line up appropriately to allow me to do this. I'm forever grateful for it. And I want to come as an advocate for this stuff rather than just another statistic, because I was for a very long time.
I once heard somebody say to me, and I can't remember where I heard it, but that a lot of people who are going through suicidal thoughts, and sometimes the ones who even actually try to attempt it, is there's a feeling of hopelessness. There's a feeling of, and that's really what it is they cannot see a future past the one that they have.
Yeah.
But the person did say, it's like the idea of the suicide is actually not a bad one. It is the idea of killing the identity of you having of yourself right now. And
Yep.
that's okay to kill, not in the physical sense, but in in that sense where I want to shed this skin. I want to put this person that I am today to rest because I'm not happy with this person. And I want to kill that identity and move forward and become a new me.
Yep.
And I think the distinction between that versus the physical, when we're overwhelmed and panicked, is a very important line to clear. That yes, the idea of committing suicide to the identity you are is one thing, but to the existence is another.
Yep.
So for those people who are going through that and they're not telling anybody, what was that thing that would make you stop? If you're okay sharing that.
Yeah. I'm going to use a Dune quote because I'm a big fucking nerd and it's always relevant to me.
Yes.
I haven't watched
I
those
haven't watched
movies
it
yet, so
We
Read the
can't-
books.
there.
Read the books. Read the books. But here's the Dune quote. Kill the boy to become the man. Think about that. We go through rites of passage, and historically it's been warfare and marriage. Those are our primary rites of passage. Warfare is wrought in trauma. To get to marriage, you have to go through trauma. Okay. Those are huge rites of passage that has conditioned our identity. And through all those rites of passage, often to kill the boy to become the man, we sometimes don't make it because that boy dies and therefore never becomes that man. So that's a big part. So keeping that mentality has been a big part of, I don't necessarily want to kill the boy that I was, because I have to heal that boy. I also have to give respect and honor to that angry young man who was the reason why I survived to become this man. And a big thing, like this idea of killing parts of self, I believe, and this is through therapy, you can't. You have to nurture and love those parts of self to raise up and become who you are and who you're trying to become. Because if I delete those parts of self, then I'm missing parts of myself. And that's a huge reframe. Because again, all the stuff that I experienced as a young man to survive, that's how I got to be who I am now. So looking at all this tapestry of what makes me me, it is all these things. And I need to give honor and respect. And honestly, the other one too is telling that young man, like, I got you, homie. Hang up the sword. I got it now. Thank you. Because you live with that ghost. You always do. But you can love him as an old friend and help him work your way through. And on top of all that, heal that little boy and parent him in the ways that you needed, but you can do it now as an adult. And I do that in recognition of my own children of, I don't want them to be who I was, but they are who I am or who I'm part of be. And so with that, moving forward as the man that I'm trying to become, is I make a choice and I follow through that plan of action and moving forward. So again, kill the boy, become the man, but you have to make that choice. And so again, and the other part about that reframe is, after that last attempt, is I treat it now, because I've had so many opportunities that I should have fucking died. I mean, getting the amount of gang jumpings that I got into and shootings and getting my head crushed in with a bat, and then stuff in the military and just my upbringing, like I should have fucking died. Not to mention all my suicide attempts, but like this last one, I came to this realization with the universe, like, I'm done. I am tired of this shit. I'm not going to do this anymore, because you keep keeping me around for a reason. So I'm going to believe in that belief system. And now I treat, back to the original statement of like why I'm so upbeat at this point, is I treat every day after that incident in 2019 as a gift and as a point of gratitude to those who brought me to this point, supported and mentored me and helped me get to it, I'm showing gratitude by being here, being responsible for what I do, and being happy that every day is a gift. It's not that I'm afraid of death. I've accepted it a long time ago, and I really tried to fucking meet death, and I had. But at this point, like now, it's just like, if it happens, it happens, but it's not going to be my own hand. But I'm going to be grateful thereafter every day that I'm here on this earth and in this plane of existence. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and I mean, everybody's got their own story and framework in terms of what the point of realization at the moment, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's LivingWorks is a globally recognized company and a teaching school that I got my certification and registration to be able to teach assist through.
Yeah.
And they actually got a video. They're promoting a movie that's coming out about the intervention of a police officer on the San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about, you know, the attempted suicide, and then they go into, you know, the whole reasoning, and they interview that individual and the connection that him and that police officer now have, and you know, coming to the realization that no, I actually don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Right? And then just it's simply being able to sometimes, and I shouldn't say simply, but sometimes actually having that person just, you know, if somebody's around and just says, "Hey man, are you all right?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because there's that pain, right? So there's that existence that we're talking about, but then there's also sometimes people just can't find a way away from the pain.
Yeah. And
whatever they're experiencing, and the only solution that they now understand to be the one that's going to work is, I'm going to end it.
It's a symptom. It's a symptom of a wider diagnosis.
It's the trauma kindling that hasn't been dealt with for some people, right? And we talk about it in the program as contributing factors. And then, you know, this is just a way that it manifested itself out for that person, specifically based on their core identity, their core values, their epigenetics, right? This is the solution they came up with.
And here's the other part, which is great about this, is we recognize our own. People who have gone through a lot of trauma, we recognize our own, whether it's soldiers, survivors, martial artists, because we're all a little interesting in the head. We get into do the things that we do because we come from an interesting background. So we recognize our own. So there's an opportunity for compassion and empathy and communication and support. And this is where, going back to the question about transitioning to the military and using martial arts as a conduit for building tribe and companionship and accountability, is like, again, you're there for shared suffering, and a lot of people who come into the martial arts has this background as it is anyways, and we recognize our own, and we recognize how we can help each other and prop each other up, and we have the responsibility to each other of like, you got to show up to training because I need you as a training partner as well, and we check in on you saying, hey, where are you at, because I need you to roll, but also let's help you out while you're there.
Yeah, and that was interesting too, because we talk about it just made me think of it. When I was in basic, there was a platoon mate who made an attempt, and I happened to talk him down. What sucked is, and I kicked myself for a long time, and I still do, but eventually you realize, again, through the training that I've had, they made the choice, right? It was going to happen. It just, it worked the second time. Yeah. And about 18 months later, he made another attempt and succeeded.
Yeah.
But it sucked for a long time. I regretted every moment of it, but I couldn't show up to the funeral, right? Just because I felt so guilty. But that's a choice he made. And regardless of having an intervention or somebody, you know, suppressing that the second time around, it was eventually going to happen. Kind of like what you were saying, is like, he just wasn't tired enough to say, no, I'm not going to do it anymore. There's this insurmountable amount of pain.
Yeah.
And, you know, for the amount of times, you know, I made him safe for the moment, I guess, is where I'm going. But it was a choice, and it was the path that he was going to take regardless. So
Yeah, I had a similar situation with an athlete of mine that it's taken me a long time to work my way through. I had an athlete of mine who was coming to me specifically through the addiction recovery community. Like, he was using the gym to maintain sobriety and accountability. And when I shut the gym down, he committed suicide within 6 months. And I'm not saying that like the gym was the only thing, but it was that guilt of like, hey, was I part of that? Which I knew I was, but he committed suicide after the gym. And one of the things I've had to reframe is like, it's not my fault, not my responsibility, but it still fucking hurts.
Yeah.
Because the gym was a place that was safe for him and everything else, but ultimately it was his decision. And this young man was not even 30. His name was Aaron Timber Gray. And every New Year's is somber for me because that's when he passed. So it's just, you can be safe in the moment, but how do you carry that thereafter? And one of the ways I find that we carry it is we tell their stories and keep their name alive. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that story too. You guys have any other questions?
No.
You good?
No, thank you so much. Because I mean, honestly, right now, like, my life is not the easiest, but this kind of puts in perspective that, shit, my life is pretty fucking good.
Yeah, but your story is your story.
I know,
right?
I know.
I remember running into somebody, and I was really good friends with him. We served at different times, and I remember talking about, I finally opened up about why I left. And that person said to me, well, that's not trauma. And said, this, and we're going to close with this too, but I have infinite amount of respect for everybody who serves and goes out and does what they do so that we can be here and do this podcast, essentially. Right. And feel safe about doing it.
Yeah.
So thank you to everybody who does that. But what this person did to me was made me feel even worse in terms of the regret and the shame that I had, because according to that individual, I didn't do what other people did. And therefore, my trauma wasn't recognized as an actual trauma.
It's not enough. It's not enough.
And so what I learned later, after becoming a traumatologist and learning the stuff about mental health, is everybody, I talk about it again, is everybody's core values and epigenetics are different.
Mm-hmm.
We all carry a specific amount of trauma kindling before it catches fire. Yeah. And that could be at a different time for everybody. Right. So I know that now. And again, I wish I was still friends with this person. I've tried to reach out just to kind of see how things are going, but that's in the past. I just wish I had an opportunity to talk to this person and sort of let them know, because I have no idea what they're going through at this moment, because at the time I also knew they were going through some heavy stuff. Having friends that they serve with, family members, almost immediately after them going through their own attempt. So, it's tough, but I guess the message I'm getting at is that everybody has their own story, and having an opportunity to tell it can be a huge burden off of our backs.
Agreed. Like, a big part of that is getting stuck in the rear of a mirror. I'm not the only one who uses this analogy, but being stuck in the rear of a mirror robs you of the presence, and you have no idea for the opportunity to look forward to where you're going or where you're trying to be, because the windshield is much bigger in scope of like what you're looking at than that in the rear of a mirror. You can't go into the past, so don't get stuck there. Enjoy the present, be grateful for it, and just keep moving forward. Again, movement is life and it's medicine. And on top of all that, in comparison, I mean, Theodore Roosevelt put it out quite succinctly, not the big stick quote, but the other one, that comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
In the end of all things, depending upon whom and whatever you stand in front of at the summation of your life, your experiences of what you did is who you are, and more importantly, they're yours. Your absolute experience is your absolute responsibility, and that makes up who you are. Because again, we are the summation of our experiences. So go grow by experiencing stuff and don't compare your experiences to others because they're doing the same thing to you. So with that, enjoy together and accept that you're both unique and wonderful, beautiful individuals, and we all work together as a process. So.
Exactly. And that's a good part to have. Like, it's a good ecosystem to have when the mindset is like that. The solution. So we learn in post-traumatic growth processes having the salutogenic approach as opposed to the pathogenic, and focusing on the symptoms and the reasoning and the source. We still need to know that to move forward, but focusing on forward, like you said, let's get to the present and where do you want to be now or in 5 years? And so I guess my ultimate message at the end here is also, if anybody knows a veteran or currently serving member or families of those people, and just say thanks, right? Regardless, say thanks, say I appreciate it, and just reach out to them and say hello. That might be everything to them, because we have no idea what they're going through, right? Everybody's fighting their own battle. And like, I know in Canada, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in the US and other nations too, but we have veterans that went and fought for us to be here, to be free, and they're on the streets.
Yep.
And if one message that I could send out right now, especially before Remembrance Day and Veterans Day, is that don't discount why that person is there. You know, a lot of people have this bias towards people that are on the streets and say, well, they're a bum or they're homeless, go out and get a job. Have you taken the time to actually know that person's story?
Yeah.
Why are they there? Again, a trauma-informed approach. That's what I always try to have. It's not going to do you any harm to ask a question.
Yep.
So what? It'll give you 15 minutes to have a conversation, maybe more. But you might change that person's life completely just by talking to them.
They might change yours.
And 100% might change yours. And I talk about I have that naloxone comparison. It's completely inert if somebody's not having an overdose. But if they are, it's going to save their life and give you that time to be able to get them to safety.
Yep.
It's not going to hurt if you have a good discussion with somebody. And our veterans need that. The people who are suffering need that from a mental health perspective. Just take the time to listen. That's all.
That's how we developed empathy and compassion, is by spending the time and sharing stories. And I'm grateful for, and just for my own podcast, I'm grateful for the gift of people's time to share their stories with me, because it helps everybody else. It helps us all. And again, for our fellow veterans out there, like, you're never out of the fight. And on top of all that, the reason why we fight is based on love. So within our community is we got to love our brothers and sisters, let alone our community, because the things that we did is because of that love of community. So there's a responsibility of the community to help them out and us to help the community. So there is that dynamic that we need to accept and acknowledge and just move forward together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I appreciate it. I hope you got something out of this too.
Oh, yeah.
Right on. You guys have any last words? Or I should say last words. Anything?
No, last for now.
Just thank you for your service. Thank you to all the veterans out there who sacrificed their time, some of them their lives, and to their families who have lost somebody. Thank you on behalf of them, and happy Veterans Day and Remembrance Day to all those watching.
Yeah, thank you. Jake?
Remember, guys, that if you are in your darkest hour, there's always people that are there. We can reach out. If you have that time where you don't feel very well and you feel like you're going to do something silly, just give someone a call. Sometimes just, hearing that friendly voice helps. It, gives you that reframe of say, oh, I have friends. I have people that care. Because sometimes in that dark hour, you feel like you're alone, but you're not. You're not. I know it's an illusion. I know you feel like shit, but that simple call sometimes will really change everything. You know what I mean? Then you can proceed with, either therapy or whatever help you need to get. But to just make sure that you call somebody, because you're not alone.
That's a good message. And on that note, we have a, our tagline is focus agency and regulation. It's all about focusing on what we need to do, restoring that sense of agency and control in our lives, and regulation as we move forward. That's kind of our tagline now. We come up with it. So the hashtag is how far, in capitals, will you go, right? So that's our challenge to everybody that's struggling, right? If you want to move forward, restore that sense of agency, let's focus on that, and let's, we can help you regulate, right? So that challenge out there to those that really truly want to get better is how far will you go? So that's it.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you guys. I appreciate you.
You too.